In 1966, an 11-year-old black boy moved with his parents and family to a white neighborhood in Washington. Sitting with his two brothers and two sisters on the front step of the house, he waited to see how they would be greeted. They were not. Passers-by turned to look at them, but no one gave them a smile or even a glance of recognition. All the fearful stories he had heard about how whites treated blacks seemed to be coming true. Years later, writing about those first days in their new home, he says, "I knew we were not welcome there. I knew we would not be liked there. I knew we would have no friends there. I knew we should not have moved there." As he was thinking those thoughts, a white woman coming home from work passed by on the other side of the road. She turned to the children and with a broad smile said, "Welcome," disappearing into the house. She then emerged minutes later with a tray laden with drinks and cream cheese and jelly sandwiches, which she brought over to the children, making them feel at home. That moment, the young man later wrote, changed his entire life. It gave him a sense of belonging where there was none before. It made him realize, at a time when race relations in the United States were still fraught, that a black family could feel at home in a white area, that there could be a relationship, and that there was some color blindness. The young man, Stephen Carter, eventually became a law professor at Yale and wrote a book about what he learned that day. He called it Civility. The woman who brought him the sandwiches was named Sarah Kestenbaum. He added that it was no coincidence that she was a Jew. In the Jewish tradition, he notes, such as civility is called chesed, and doing acts of kindness, which in turn derive from the understanding that human beings are made in the image of God. And he reflects on that moment and says, "Every time I close my eyes," he said, "almost every time, I can taste the smooth, slick sweetness of the cream cheese and the jelly sandwiches that I gobbled on that summer afternoon when I discovered how a single act of genuine and unassuming civility can change someone's life forever." Similar to this week's Torah portion, where we find Rebecca. We meet Rebecca this week, the very famous, very awesome Rebecca, as in Isaac and Rebecca. And Abraham sends his trusted buddy, whose name isn't even mentioned in the text initially, we find out later is Eliezer, and says to him, "Do me a favor, go back to my hometown and find someone for my kid to marry." And so Eliezer says, "Okay." And he goes and he sits down by a well, and he thinks to himself, how in the world am I going to find someone who is going to, I don't know what to do. And then a single act of civility emerged. Rebecca, who walked over after hundreds of people walked by, while he sat there, thirsty, with his probably, the midrash, the sort of legend of the story says, 100 camels, all thirsty and tired, and she came over and she said, you look thirsty. Let me get you some water. And so she gave water not just to him, but to all the camels as well, herself, all 100 camels, herself. If you know anything about camels, which I do not, I hear they drink a lot. So I hear it's about 10 gallons to quench the thirst of a camel. That's what I hear in my dealings with camels, which are intricate. Not at all. But that's a lot of water. And so that moment of civility, that moment of chesed, which we know as a good Jewish warm term for loving kindness, for love and deed, for this undefinable word in English, we have this word chesed, that he felt on that morning where he felt abandoned, now welcomed by someone who walked by with a sandwich. And so was Eliezer. And so thus is born the story of Chayei Sarah, this week's Torah portion, where we find out right at the beginning that Sarah dies. Initially, we find out, first thing. Interesting, because Chayei Sarah means the life of Sarah. And then the first thing we find out is that she dies. But then we hear about every other part of her story and how it connects, ultimately leading Isaac, her son, and Rebekah, this incredible woman, back into her tent, where it becomes their tent eventually. And so it's this civility, this beautiful moment that sort of carries us in this week's Torah portion along with the story. And this idea of chesed, this idea of showing this love and this deed, this sort of going above and beyond to just be nice, but in our context, the Jewish people, to give chesed, which is past nice. It's the next level. It's the showing up level. It's the showing up and doing something level. And so I will tell you that I felt no stronger sense of chesed. I always say that I don't think Torah portions, I don't think we pick Torah portions. I think they pick us in our situations. And I think that standing on Thursday, if you were there in the morning at 7:30 at Sprouts, while some people showed up to deliver over 900 meals to people around the valley who couldn't get for themselves. Most the Congregation Beth Israel has ever given, 900 meals, all over the city. That was chesed. And so it's interesting, and I don't even think it's that interesting, that the tie-in to the idea of this woman who we treasure so much and is mentioned in every time we pray, Rebekah, Rivka, that this chesed that she shared sort of gets to connect to every one of us, gets to sink into every one of us. A chesed is defined with some help from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who is the former head rabbi of England, shares the word chesed in providing shelter for the homeless, food for the hungry, assistance to the poor, visiting the sick, comforting the mourner, and the litany of words and concepts that connect to what chesed, to what true chesed actually means, to the idea of this beautiful concept that we get to carry with us as a Jewish people. So much so that the commentary says this. It even says that chesed is greater than tzedakah. It even says. If you have to rank them, chesed higher than tzedakah. Chesed is this idea of this loving kindness. Tzedakah, of course, is the badly translated as charity, but it is much more than that. It is sort of giving with righteousness. But he says that chesed is higher than tzedakah in three ways. One, charity, for using the lack of a better term, is done with one's money, while loving kindness may be done with one's money and with our whole person. That's number one. Number two, charity is done only to the poor, while loving kindness can be given to the poor and the rich. You can provide love and care. And the third reason is that charity is given only to the living, while chesed can be given also to the dead, that we can connect and love and be part of people's lives who were part of our lives before. And so that's what Jonathan Sacks says, that's what chesed is. It seeps in that beautiful Jewish way for all of us, past even the beautiful idea of tzedakah, which we care so much for and know so much about. It's also not a coincidence that it's Thanksgiving in general, that we should be we're thinking of how we give thanks for ourselves and for the people around us. That the chesed can sort of in this time in our lives, maybe in the season for people who are sort of seeking some extra love and care, can go into overdrive, into chesed overdrive, if you will. And then, of course, there is this connection that we make with our Torah portion, to think of Rivka, to think of the beautiful words of Stephen Carter, who had that moment where someone came up to him with a sandwich that changed his life forever, and how we can then show this love and this kindness. We can, because it's still a mess out there of a political world, that we still get all the emails from every place, and it's too much, that we have to go back a little bit to our chesed, maybe more to the purple, less to the red and less to the blue, a little more to the purple this time, what we're trying to figure out for ourselves. And so we need to live our lives with this chesed. The great and fabulous, awesome Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used to say, "When I was young, I admired cleverness. Now that I am old, I find I admire kindness much more." And so, deep wisdom in those words. It was that Eliezer connected to Rivka, and that Rivka connects to Isaac, and that through them we all connect. And through that loving kindness, through that beautiful moment that we get to hear from Stephen Carter, we also connect to that civility, that our job as Jews is to provide the chesed, is to provide the civility times whatever number you want to whatever power you want to. And so Rebecca goes out of her way to share her loving kindness. And so I invite all of us on this Shabbat, that connects to this Torah portion of Shabbat that connects to Thanksgiving, to also find many, many ways in our lives to provide chesed. Shabbat Shalom.